Maritime's very good at having a conversation with maritime. We're not as good as we could be about talking outside. And that's where I think there's a lot of work still to be done.
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast, where I meet interesting maritime professionals sharing their passion for the shipping industry and their everyday job. I am your host. My name is Lena Gothberg.
Hello, Shipping Podcast listener. Welcome to the 126th episode of the Shipping Podcast. We are rapidly approaching the end of this year and this decade. But I think there will be room for one more episode after this before we open the year 2020. So in this episode, you will be listening to a maritime communicator, Nicola Good, who is now Head of Brand and External Relations, Marine and Offshore, at Lloyd's Register, but used to work as a maritime journalist for a long time. Nicola and I met for the first time in real life earlier this year. And when I was in London at the end of June, I managed to get her in front of the microphone. I hope you enjoy our conversation. This is Nicola Good for you.
Welcome to the Shipping Podcast. Could you please introduce yourself?
I'm Nicola Good. I'm a maritime communicator. I've been in shipping for 23 years, mostly as a journalist, but now I'm sort of poacher turned gamekeeper and working in a communications role at Lloyd's Register.
So what is your background?
My background is I grew up in South Africa and I studied journalism and media studies. And how I got into shipping was by failing an essay. It was the usual story of a Sunday, big weekend, big party, and a piece of work due to be submitted on a Monday morning. And clearly, 5 o'clock Sunday night, I started work and started panicking a little bit. And, deadlines are deadlines, and I had to submit something the following morning. And I went to go and speak to my lecturer to say, look, that wasn't my best piece of work ever. And he agreed that he would grade me on the piece I'd submitted, but he was happy to remark another piece of work if I felt that I had the capacity to follow through. And I was mortified because it was really, really, really not my best work. And so I duly submitted the essay and it got marked and I got the comment. And several months later, once I'd graduated, I got a phone call from a woman looking for an editorial assistant for the Lloyd's List Africa Weekly product. And it turned out that she'd spoken to this particular lecturer and he'd remembered me. So clearly, the first lesson was your byline counts. People will recognize that you need to do your best. And if you know you haven't done your best, you better own up to it. So that was my introduction to the shipping industry. And a year working in Johannesburg for Lloyd's List Africa Weekly, and my decision to go walk about for 2 years to see the big wide world resulted in me working on Lloyd's List in London. And I did that for, probably the next 20 years in many shapes and forms. 10 years as a freelancer where I would work for Lloyd's List, but do other projects and this allowed me to have a bit of a foray into the .com boom, which was great fun. And then latterly, once I'd got my children out of the way, I took a full-time role. And that's when I think I became better known to maritime. So that's how I got into shipping.
Oh, that's interesting. It's really interesting. So what are the biggest changes that you have seen in shipping?
Consolidation. I mean, your average ship owner has 4 to 5 vessels. I mean, you've seen people come together and you've seen some of the legacy names go. Ned Lloyd, P&O, CP Ships. You've seen so much change within the sector, but you've also seen huge advances in terms of the use of technology. Good old days. This is a funny story for you. When I first walked into the Lloyd's List London newsroom, I had a Hotmail account, and I was one of the few people who actually had an email address. And there was one computer that was connected to the internet. Okay, admittedly, this is 1996 or 1997. I can't remember the exact year. And I remember Michael Gray calling me into his office and saying, so this internet thing, is it going to be big? And it was, well, actually, yes, it's going to be huge. And, we sort of had a bit of a conversation about it. And I don't know, I think I felt I'd won the conversation when I left. And I think he probably felt he'd won the conversation. But I can tell you who won that one. I mean, just in terms of the use of technology, the way information gets shared, in terms of the systems on board vessels, in terms of the connected ship, technology's been huge, and that's not going to change. But it's going to mean digitalization is going to be the enabler going forward. So that's been a huge change. But started in shipping sort of 23, 24, young girl going into a room, and it was quite intimidating because it was very, very masculine, and it tended to be a lot of older people. And that makes it quite difficult when you don't know the industry as well as the other people in the room. And it's always difficult to navigate a new environment. And the one overriding feature of maritime is that it's incredibly collegiate. People will willingly share knowledge. The difficulty is knowing who can share the knowledge with you and getting them to buy into you so that they will willingly engage. Because, a lot of people, everyone wants something, but we can't entertain every request that comes our way. So to actually win those friends, it takes a while, but they're friends for life. That is maritime is definitely a people's business.
Yeah.
Relationships are absolutely paramount.
Yeah, so it's important to start building them from the beginning.
And I think most people do. And, it's an old-fashioned industry where, social niceties matter. The pleases and the thank yous and the follow-up. And it's silly things. It's introducing people. If you go into a room and you know a lot of people there, you're almost duty-bound to take the newbies under your wing and to make sure that they can build confidence, and they can also be made to be part of that wider network. And I think sometimes that the clubby nature can prevent that from happening, or people just don't see it. And I think that's one of those things where, if you are aware that there is somebody new, I think, you've got to do your bit.
But things are changing now, isn't it?
I know. Probably one of the most exciting things is to see how the industry is embracing diversity. They're definitely, I don't know if they're definitely more women in senior positions, but we definitely know more about women in senior positions. And, which is phenomenal because they serve as role models. So, every single inspiring story might allow a young girl to think that there is possibility within this industry for her. There's a hell of a lot of work to do. Case in point, I'm a mother, I've got 2 daughters. I went to a parent-teacher evening at a lovely school in leafy West London, and it was one of those days where I'd actually put my makeup on and I was looking vaguely presentable with heels and all, and it was an evening to select subjects, and there was a career advisor in the room. So he turned to me and he said, "So what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I work in shipping." And his jaw literally hit the floor. And he's like, "Well, you don't look like you work in shipping." And I was like, "What do you mean? What do I have to look like to work in shipping? I've got to be wearing a boiler suit, or have I got to be wearing a uniform?" And so we had a bit of a sparring match because it's quite natural for me to put people on the spot. And it turned out that he was a career advisor to 4 girls' schools in West London. And not once had there been a presentation on shipping as a career option. I was mortified because that's our industry not talking outside. Maritime, I'll say it and I'll say it again. Maritime's very good at having a conversation with maritime. We're not as good as we could be about talking outside. And that's where I think there's a lot of work still to be done. And, all of us, we've all got the responsibility to go and talk about what we do. And we have, hugely exciting careers. My time as a journalist, you go from anywhere, from a shop floor to the Houses of Parliament within several hours. You have access that you just can't believe. You will meet leaders and you meet everyone. And you have to treat everyone with the same care and candor because everyone's got a story to tell. And that's hugely exciting. And when people suddenly start realizing that they can actually do a communications career within maritime, that's an easy sell, in my view.
I totally agree. And my latest experiment is that I advise everyone to image Google shipping and see what comes up.
I haven't done that, actually.
No, you should try it, and everyone should try it.
What does come up?
Well, it's a Popeye guy.
Oh, no.
With a pipe, usually. Or if you Google seafarer. And that is not how our industry is. I mean, that is not our industry.
No.
But it's our responsibility together to change that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, obviously, there's so many examples of women doing well in maritime. And I mean, in my previous role as editor of Fair Play, we actually put together a supplement of accomplished women in maritime, because the successful women in maritime are almost the best kept secret, because there's sometimes a reluctance for people to promote, to self-promote, or actually put themselves out there. You know, people work hard to do well. And I'll be completely frank. I've never found my gender an obstacle at all. I've been incredibly lucky in that the people that I've worked with have always valued me for me. And, there have been times where, I've had men who have been more interested in talking to my cleavage than actually making eye contact with me. And I think we've all probably had those kinds of experiences. But that's not necessarily a maritime thing per se. I mean, it's just, sometimes it's an unfortunate factor that, sometimes being women in the workplace, you can endure as a woman in the workplace. But I think in terms of showcasing success and showing the steps to getting or climbing up that ladder to get there, I think there's a lot to be done, because I think sometimes it seems as if it almost happens by magic. It doesn't. And then obviously, shipping is, with the average owner having 5 vessels, there's a huge family nature. There's a family ownership is very significant. So there's often that sort of silver spoon element where I haven't had to work to get to where I've got to. It's been laid out in front of me. And that varies from region to region, because, when you're sort of talking 5th, 6th generation, as you are with the Hamburg families, there has to be a beauty show to see who is the right person to take the lead. Whereas in other contexts where it's 2nd to 3rd generation, it's kind of assumed. And I think that's another interesting dynamic. And I know a lot of the leading owners, they've make their kids work their socks off to actually prove to their employees that those children deserve to be where they are. Whether it's working in the galley or on board a passenger ferry, or a lot of those parents will ensure that those kids actually earn their stripes within maritime. But I do think we need to show the career progression far more clearly.
So I think that what you did when you presented all these women in your last position, I think that helped so much. It opened up the can in a way.
It was funny. It wasn't just Fair Play. It was Tradewinds did one at the same time, and Lloyd's List had been doing quite a lot in terms of the gender pay gap. So in terms of what were the tier 1 publications about this time last year, we were all thinking similar thoughts. And that's kind of how it needs to be. You need to have impetus. There needs to be collective action. And, we all had our slightly different take on it, but it definitely put the message out there. But it wasn't us who put the message out. If you think of what Time magazine did in November 2017 with its Me Too campaign, that very much put gender at the forefront.
Yep.
And it has continued. There was momentum, and I think that momentum's being sustained. But, it's also about taking that conversation and making that conversation move forward. If we keep laboring the same themes, the conversation's just going to lose traction. So it's about working out what the new message is. A lot of good stuff has happened. Take, for example, BIMCO. Sedan Captain Glue is now the BIMCO president. Who would have thought BIMCO would have a female president? And the best thing of all is in 2 years' time, when Sedan steps down, Sabrina Kwong is going to take over. So, we'll have 4 years of female leadership at the helm of BIMCO. And, BIMCO is the largest ship owner organization. I think it's got something like 2,300 members. That's great.
Yeah.
That is setting an example for what it could be elsewhere. And, I think we will see more leadership positions occupied by women. But, it can't be tokenism. It's got to be the right women in the right role because they deserve to be there and they have a very firmly established track record.
I totally agree. I also think that the IMO theme this year for empowering women in the maritime industry has helped.
I would totally agree. It was music to my ears when it was announced. It is one of the... it's gladdened my heart because it was very, the sort of pale, stale and male, I think is the terminology that other people have used. And, yes, it's good to see more women on panels, but, you still need to have the right speakers on panels.
Oh, yes.
And, I think it's not going to happen overnight, but there's definitely a drive towards more diversity within maritime.
I agree. And my experience now, I have been working with this a little time. I will not suggest that you have panels on diversity. You should have diverse panels.
I would agree. This is the point I was trying to make about moving the conversation on. I think some of the points have been really clearly stated. And if we keep sort of banging on about them, we'll lose credibility. Yeah. It's about taking the conversation and moving it forward.
We could see that in North Shipping because we had the Vista seminar, Waves of Changes, and that has been there for a couple of times before. Mm-hmm. And we had such a great panel and so many good keynote speakers. And the room was full with women.
And that's phenomenal, but we shouldn't be excluding the men because we want them to be part of this drive.
Well, the problem is that, diversity isn't a female issue.
No, I know.
But how do we get the men interested?
I think it's about the conversation and how we talk around it and how we talk about it and how we frame it and present it. And I think... there needs, the difficulty is and I'm taking it as a woman. Feminism comes in a myriad of flavors. We've all got our own particular take on it, and it's because of the role models in our lives and our experiences, and it means different things to different people. And some people are far more militant than others. And I think sometimes, depending on the response and the way the conversation is framed, it can raise people's heckles, or it can be a turn off rather than a turn on. And I think this is where it's a hugely important issue. And I think in terms, we need to really consider how we move the conversation forward. And this is where, sort of collective groups like Vista, where people are seriously considering how to put that message out, can make a huge difference.
I totally agree. It's so boring because I always agree with my guests.
Well, do you want me to say something controversial?
Yeah, you can if you want.
Well, I don't know. What shall we say?
How do you see the future for shipping in general?
I see it. It's exciting. And I think this decade, with some of the sustainability targets coming in, I think it's going to, this is the decade of change. In terms of what the IMO is doing in terms of greenhouse gases, the sustainability question, the need to decarbonize, the rise of the zero-emission vessel. I think it is an exciting place to be, and there is going to be so much change. And, what we're doing now is laying down the future for, the next generation. And, it's a serious job. We've got to get it right.
Yeah, and we need to change the profile of shipping.
That we definitely
going
need
back to that, yeah.
Oh, this is where I think shipping looking outside, look, shipping people are shipping people. They like to talk amongst themselves. Yeah. And it's comfortable, it's easy. Sometimes we might have to face up to more difficult conversations. And, that's life. When you're challenged, you need to rise to the challenge and you need to consider your answer. And if we are found wanting, we need to hold our hands up and we need to take stock, and we need to take action to move things forward. And I'm looking quite forward to seeing what the IMO comes up with in 2023, when they sort of, at the moment it's all about talk, but what is that regulation going to look like, and what does it mean for the industry? And obviously, you've got a variety of interest groups who are busy trying to frame the conversation according to some of their desires. And we saw quite recently, do we have goal-based measures or do we have speed restrictions? That was an interesting talking point. I think as an industry, sometimes you've got to, take the expensive option and make plans for the future and actually make the changes now so that things can move ahead.
So in your new role, what do you do nowadays?
Well, from having a soapbox and having some very strong views about a lot of issues, it's a case of, well, for me, it's been an interesting transition. As a journalist, you tend to have a sort of you have an overview of what's going on in maritime. You know enough about a few things, but you never really delve deeply into the detail. I mean, having joined Lloyd's Registers afforded me an opportunity to lift the bonnet and actually immerse myself in maritime. And there's a lot of exciting stuff going on. And there are a lot of great stories to tell. And, as a journalist, you're a storyteller. And so for me, having the opportunity to know what's going on and to be able to tell the story the way I'd like to tell it, not necessarily going to be the most newsworthy way, but by and large it is, because, I'm a journalist. I like to get into the detail fairly quickly. I need to know what it means for me, with the threats, the risks, the implications, all that stuff's quite key. And for maritime, which is an audience that doesn't suffer fools, you need to deliver messages that matter very, very quickly. So it's the opportunity to see what's going on. I mean, it's a different kind of role, because instead of reporting on what's happening, it's a case of looking, sort of really considering the messaging. But it's also an opportunity to see how an organization like Lloyd's Register, and it's 260 years old next year. It's one of the legacy, it's a legacy company. But it's a company that has survived for 260 years, and it hasn't survived by sitting on its hands. It's always had to innovate. And, there's a hell of a lot of innovation going on. So it's an incredibly exciting place to be. And yeah, it's a different role, but a lovely, lovely team of people. And there is a nice editorial product that I look after called Horizons. And so that gives us an opportunity to have a voice and a say about what we're doing in the industry. And also to show that what we're doing isn't poles apart from what other people are doing, because we work with a number of stakeholders. We work with pretty much everyone in maritime, and everyone's thinking along similar lines. So Horizons gives us an opportunity to say, well, to tell people about what we're doing, but to also look at what other people are doing, and to consider what that means for the sector far more widely.
How do we make the maritime industry more visible to the general public? What tools should we use?
I think the maritime industry needs to engage more readily with the international and national media. I think it's about getting people who can talk on sofas on news shows to talk about what the industry is doing. I think it's also about raising awareness amongst the younger generation. I don't know. Shipping was not really on my radar as a kid. But, and the first time I went to Denmark, I was absolutely blown away, because it was probably the first time I actually saw shipping adverts on a tube or at the airport, because there is such, people are so proud of the maritime legacy. I didn't grow up in the UK, but just from what I've observed, maritime, given sort of the heritage, the maritime heritage in the UK, it's very hidden. People don't recognize what goes on until such time as something goes wrong. Invariably, the oily bird, the minute a vessel goes down, or there is loss of life, or there is an environmental catastrophe, then people are interested in the sector. But the negative stories tend to get far more traction than the positive stories. I think if we try to educate kids about maritime early on, more books about ships. We've got Thomas the Tank Engine. I don't know, maybe there is a maritime equivalent that I haven't spotted, but I've read plenty of bedtime stories, and I don't think I ever read one about, pilots going in and out of port, or, I don't think that really exists. And I think getting people interested young, making it far more visible, and getting it into the mainstream media would really help. And then it's all of us, the number of times I've been to a dinner party and I start talking about what I do, and I get people say, "Oh, shipping, I'd never thought about that." And, if we've all got great stories to tell, and, sometimes, the rules of dinner parties, don't talk about sex, politics, or religion, but hell, talk about work. And if you've got an exciting job, which you definitely do, recording your shipping podcast, and you're meeting fabulous people, and you're picking up bits and pieces from everyone, share those. I think, we all like a story.
Yeah, but you used to be a journalist. So when I speak to journalists, why are we not more in mainstream media? They say, well, we never write about a house that is not on fire either.
I don't think that's strictly true. Okay, sort of the old adage, good news is no news. I don't think that's strictly true. There are some phenomenal developments underway. In terms of autonomous shipping, we all love to hear about driverless cars. We all know about the man who was reading Harry Potter in the driverless car and then, Tesla collided and it was a big fat story. Okay, yes, you could say that was a negative story because, yes, there was an accident. But, there is some really sexy stuff going. And I think it's about how we engage with the mainstream media. And I think people are becoming far more outward looking. But it's also quite, I'm now going back, putting my trade press hat on. It becomes very difficult when some of the more exciting companies in shipping decide not to engage with the trade press because they want the bigger titles. And then the bigger titles don't have the expertise to carry the stories or to write the stories as well as they could be. Yeah. So, I'm not going to mention names, but,
No?
where, the leadership interview that a shipping journalist would get with a CEO of a carrier would be very, very different from a transport correspondent who's coming cold and doesn't understand what the significance of the developments are. I think if there was possibly more content sharing where you got the shipping expertise producing the material with it being disseminated by a wider platform, I think that might be something that could address that. But, the difficulty is journalists like their exclusives. Everyone wants to keep their story close to their heart. Everyone wants that story to be attributed to them and their platform rather than it depends on how it's shared more widely. I think if you can maintain ownership of that story and it can go to a wider platform, I think people might be more willing. But I don't think people, I think that's an area to explore.
Yeah, so the journalists are the last ones to take on this new way of working with knowledge sharing and being transparent. And so, is that
no,
what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that as a shipping journalist on a trade publication, you want the best story for your publication. And sometimes you don't get the access because some of the companies kind of want the bigger boys. And then the bigger boys report on the story, but they don't have the expertise
I understand.
With which to get that story out. But then at the same time, it takes a huge amount of confidence for somebody to say, look, this is my story. It needs to have my byline on it. But I'm trusting it with you to share it more widely with your audience, without other people necessarily taking ownership or altering it, because we've all been edited and we've all been edited badly. And we've all had people pick up the phone to say, care? What? Mm. You're like, no, that wasn't the version that I submitted. So that's where I think that in terms of taking stories wider sometimes can be difficult. And, I also think that maybe, yes, it's two-way. Maritime needs to court the global and the international media. But I also think that perhaps those organizations need to see the significance of shipping and make sure that they've got credible people able to report on maritime developments properly.
It might also be a way to do it by trade. To talk about trade, world trade.
Well, I think so. But I think that happens. We all get excited by, economic numbers. They come in monthly. A lot of people track what's going on. Mm-hmm. And, yes, and then you got the tariffs and the implications for various sectors in terms of, what happens with...
Yeah, but the mainstream media, if they report on trade, so how is that trade done? It's not by cyberspace. It's actually carried there.
But I think it's almost, you ask your average kid, how do the carrots get to the supermarket?
Oh, yeah.
And they won't be able to answer that question. And I think sometimes when people talk about trade, the fact that there's a whole supply chain behind it is invisible.
So maybe we should join forces with the supply chain people then.
Well, I think there are very, very close ties between, it was one of my funny conversations. I interviewed Frank Coles, who is now the chief executive of Wallum, and I interviewed him when he was still in his Transas capacity. And I asked him how he got into shipping, and he started shouting at me. And he said, shipping? Shipping is the supply chain. I want to talk to you about maritime, i.e. maritime being you're leaving port, coming to another port. And so we are part of the supply chain. And sometimes we don't cover the bases. But then you get some publications that do that phenomenally. I mean, you take the Journal of Commerce, where they look at the carriers and then they look at the cargo owners. And, they don't divorce those two elements. Some of the other members of the trade press are maybe guilty of just zoning into maritime.
Or if you listen to the Supply Chain Radio, which is one of my favorite podcasts.
Is that what you do on a Sunday night?
Well, yeah, it could be if I'm walking or if I'm ironing or something else. No, I think I become bitten by this medium because it's so much fun. But the funny thing is that the podcasting industry is as hidden as the shipping industry. So I see so many similarities, and there are so few women in the podcasting industry as there is in the maritime industry. At least they're not seen. So, yeah.
I suppose in publishing, sometimes you're hidden behind the written word in the same way that you can be hidden behind a microphone. Sometimes it's the more visual mediums where people see. And that's why I love social, because you can be very, very visible there.
And your character shines through your social media.
Well, it allows you to have a voice in the way you phrase things. And, and that's the, funny thing about writers is when you've read a lot of, when you've worked with journalists for a long time, you don't even need to see the byline. You know whose words they are, because of the way people phrase things, the word choice, the sentence structure. You just know, and you can almost hear them talking through, and you can hear their voice in your head. And I think that's what happens to a lot of us. We read a lot of people, and you become terribly familiar with that voice. And it's those voices in our head that keep us going.
Interesting. So who do you think I should meet the next? Who would you be interested in listening to in the shipping podcast?
Oh, well, of course I'm going to go with a ship owner. I don't know if you've interviewed her already. But Angelique Frangu of Navios. She's an interesting lady. She's done some clever things on Wall Street. She, Navios, has everything from bulkers and containers to tankers. I'd be really interested to understand what she sees happening next in maritime. And, her take on technology. And, obviously she's a Greek owner, so it'd be quite interesting to find out what she makes of some of the regulatory changes that are coming at the turn of this year, but then some of the changes that we're still waiting for more information on. So no, definitely Angelique Frangu. But there are thousands of interesting people. I feel guilty because I probably shouldn't suggest a woman. I probably should suggest a man.
You can have two choices.
I'm allowed two? Yeah. Well, who haven't I listened to or spoken to that I'm very, very curious about? Oh, I don't know. Carsten Mortensen, he's just gone into banking. Yeah. And he was at BW Gas for a long time. And I'd love to understand what spurred that transition. I think that could be quite interesting.
Mm-hmm.
But Lena, I could give you a list. I could give you a wish list that would be very, very long.
Okay, let's turn off the microphones and do that.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Nicola, for coming.
Thank you, Nicola. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I don't know if that was because you brought up so many of the reasons for me starting this podcast, or if it was because I could have a conversation with someone who shared my view on so many things. I would like to pick up on what you said about the diversity discussion that we have going on in this industry. It's about taking the discussion further and not make it into a conversation about us or them. I couldn't agree more with you. I think that the discussion that started with the Me Too movement has more to do with change than anything else. The entire industry needs to change. And if we want that change, it starts with us. We have to be the change that we want. When I was in Colombia, at the opening panel, Lee Hoon Kwa, the Chief Officer of Maritime and Port Authority of Singapore, put it so eloquently. We have now painted a picture of how we want the future of the maritime industry to look like. Now is the time to figure out how to get there. And then we have the opportunity to try other ways and other people to reach that image. That's where diversity and inclusion gets so important. And that is what we want to convey to all of them who doesn't really believe in diversity, inclusion, or change. I want to hear from you, the listener. What is your view on diversity and inclusion as we close the year of empowering women in the maritime community? Did it have any impact? Did it make any difference to have a theme like that set up by IMO? I will leave you with that thought. Drop me a line at hello@shippingpodcast.com so I know what you think. Until the next time, from me to you, over and out.
Thank you for listening to the Shipping Podcast. Don't forget to tell everyone that you meet that there is a shipping podcast available and that they should download it and listen to the maritime professionals who are sharing their passion for the shipping industry.